Joining us now, Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware, a member of the Judiciary and Foreign Relations Committee. I want to say, Senator, that we heard a lot from the president in the Oval Office. He was with the German chancellor, but I want to play particularly what he said about America's attacks on Iran. This was just last hour. Take a listen.
They have no Navy. It's been knocked out. They have no Air Force. It's been knocked out. They have no air detection. That's been knocked out. Their radar has been knocked out. And just about everything's been knocked out. So we'll see how we do, but we're doing very well.
He also said, Senator, we have them very much beaten militarily. I know you're going to a briefing in just a couple of hours. What are your questions?
My core question is, what is the goal of this war? President Trump took us to war in Iran without clearly conveying to the American people or to Congress that represents them what's the goal, what's the duration, what are the aims, what are the means. When we heard in the last 24 hours Secretary Hegseth say he would not rule out sending boots on the ground, and when President Trump has variously said this could last a few days, a few weeks, or as long as it takes, and when President Trump has publicly identified the goals of this war as everything from eliminating the nuclear enrichment program that he had already allegedly obliterated, or turning over the regime, or sinking their Navy, we don't have clarity about why he's taken us to war, and this is not how democracies should go to war.
Let's talk about the future, because one of the things that Chancellor Merz said was that he was going to be talking to the president about the day after. What is the day after? What does that look like?
There are clearly no plans by this administration. President Trump recently said, oh, we had 3 people in mind to take over, but we killed them all in the first day. He has variously urged average Iranian citizens to take their lives in their hands and go into the streets and try to overthrow the repressive IRGC and the ongoing rule of the mullahs and the imams in Tehran, or has suggested he would cut some deal, as he did in Venezuela, with a senior member of this repressive regime. The biggest thing I think that is likely to come out of this is chaos. A repressive, well-armed machine, the Iranian regime, that has long supported terrorism and proxies in the region, that has the blood of many on its hands, is not likely to be overthrown by a handful of disorganized and unarmed protesters. If only the United States government had had a large group of seasoned and experienced people who had relevant background in helping to support civil society and resistance movements. Oh, wait, Chris, we did. It was USAID. They helped support civil society. They helped train and equip young leaders who could challenge an authoritarian regime. They did it in many countries around the world. But unfortunately, in the chaos of DOGE last year, many of those programs were either canceled, delayed, furloughed, or reduced. So the Iranian people are not hearing broadcasts in their language, principally Farsi, every day from Voice of America. We did not have a clear plan for how to work with the Iranian diaspora and how to work with groups within Iran who might be willing or ready to take on the Iranian regime. The lack of planning here is just stunning.
Well, one of the issues that's being brought up and is very urgent for American citizens who are now in one of the 12 countries where the State Department has said you need to get out is, how do I get out? If you take a look at the map of what's flying and what's not, virtually nothing is flying in or out of the Middle East. And Israel has said to American citizens, we can't help you. What would you say to a constituent who's stuck in the Middle East right now, Senator?
So I did have a conversation yesterday with the head of a school, not from my state, but a friend from another state who has 30 students who were in Dubai. Imagine the anxiety, the concern of Americans, the civilians who work for us or who live on military bases, the spouses of our armed forces, our diplomats and their families, the folks who work in our embassies, all of them being told, get out of these countries, when we often don't have ambassadors, when several of those embassies are closed, and when we did not plan for this. It was entirely predictable that when we launched a full-scale war against Iran, that they would counter by attacking civilian infrastructure, and in particular airports, with drones. That's one of the technologies that the Iranians are the best at. They've been launching drones into Ukraine on behalf of Putin's murderous regime for 4 years now. They have some of the best-in-class drones in the world. So we should have foreseen, President Trump and Secretary Rubio should have foreseen that we would need to keep our embassies supported and staffed, that we would need to be available to help evacuate Americans, and that the civilian airports they would count on might very well be closed.
As you know, the war was brought up during a hearing with DHS Secretary Kristi Noem. You were there. Your Republican colleague, Lindsey Graham, urged funding for the agency due to risks here at home. Here's what he said.
Now, we're engaged in military action against the mothership of terrorism, Iran, which I hope will sink pretty soon. Do you think the threat level against the United States is up or down when it comes to radical Islamic terrorists?
It's up.
It's up?
Yep.
So you mean they actually may want to come here and hit us because we hit them in Iran? I don't think you have to be, a general to figure that out. Can we not understand America is under siege now? Likely to be attacked because radical Islam is under siege and they're going to hit back. And we're sitting here looking at each other and not funding DHS?
I think he's referencing you and other Democrats, Senator. What do you make of that exchange?
So 2 things, if I could. I was in the room when Senator Graham made those remarks. He also said, if we need to reform ICE, if we need to change their practices, if we need to take steps to make sure that ICE is better trained and they conduct themselves better, count me in. Well, all that's left for us to do is to negotiate with the White House simple terms so that ICE agents do not carry out the sort of assaults on Americans that they did in Minneapolis. And Democrats are willing to move ahead and fund the whole rest of the Department of Homeland Security. And what we're asking for is simple and reasonable, that ICE agents follow the same sorts of rules as state and local law enforcement. Chris, I was responsible for the second largest agency in Delaware, and law enforcement works best when they're well trained, well equipped, well supported, and when they've got the respect of the community. We need to deliver for the American people an ICE that is accountable, that is humane, that is conducting itself in a constitutional and appropriate way, and we can and should do that while also defending our homeland. This administration has taken thousands and thousands of agents off of counterterrorism, off of national security, and put them on roving patrols and domestic immigration enforcement. That's what's putting us at risk more than anything else right now.
Senator Chris Coons, it's always good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.